My name is Ray.
Hi, this is Michael.
Welcome to another episode of Ray's Economics Clue Book. Today we're talking about consumer choice when it comes to price elasticity of demand.
All right.
So elasticity is essentially sensitivity when it comes to economics.
Yes.
The basic equation you memorize for elasticity is quantity Q. Elasticity equals quantity Q over Q, or a change in Q over Q over delta P over P. Q quantity, P price.
Yeah, basically it's kind of like, say, in the numerator, it's a percentage of the demand quantity change. In the denominator, it's a percentage of the price
and
change.
It's the relative. It's relative changes. So this basically shows overall how sensitive our demand is to, or quantity demanded is,
of course,
for one demand curve to change in price.
Yeah.
So let's say if the elasticity is larger than 1, this is generally considered elastic.
Yeah.
And if elasticity is less than 1, it's generally considered inelastic. What this means is that elasticity is greater than 1, which means that if price increased 10%, quantity demanded decreases by greater than 10%, in this case 20%.
Exactly.
And on the flip side, if elasticity is less than 1, then when price increases by 10%, elasticity decreases by less than 10%.
Yeah, in this case it's only 0.4, right? 4%.
So you can, from this you can infer two things. One thing is that when elasticity equals 1, which is called unit elastic, this basically means that relative changes in price and quantity are equal for a demand curve, or for a certain region or point in demand curve.
Sure.
And this also means that when a price is elastic, or quantity demanded is elastic, this means that producers probably have better advantage decreasing the prices for increased revenue in general, while the converse is true if prices demand curve is inelastic, meaning that producers were better off maybe raising the price because their quantity demanded would change less. Although this is only in general. So.
Okay. I think we can. One thing is important. I think it's worth some attention, because in the demand curve, we say the price elasticity of demand is always negative.
Yeah.
Oh, of course, because when price increase, demand is.
So this is why we're here for absolute value.
Yeah, because usually we're talking about an absolute value for the demand curve. Yeah. So.
And so, as I just quickly mentioned beforehand, we mentioned different parts of demand curve, or different parts in the region demand curve that represent different regions of quantity demanded. So basically, the elasticity is different in this quantity demanded along this demand curve.
Sure.
There's a midpoint, and above the midpoint is the upper half, then the bottom half. The upper half is usually price elastic, meaning what we just mentioned, a quantity percent change in Q is larger than percent change in P, relative changes. We look at our original elasticity equation. So look at elasticity at point A, which is in the upper half. We can change this to equation to change into delta Q over delta P times P over Q equals 4. Basically changing delta Q over delta P, which is, we see here, 12 and 20. So it's 12 over 20.
We actually write here, delta Q divided by delta Q, it's absolutely equal. 12 equals 20. Why? Because simple geometry.
Yes.
Okay. From A point, no matter it's move along to B or move along to C, we can see that delta Q, for example, move to C, delta Q is always like this. Delta P is always like that. Okay. Delta Q versus divided by delta P is always equal to 12 versus divided by 20 by some, we call that similar triangle in geometry. So if you get familiar with the geometry, it will be very simple. Right?
So we see here at the exact quantity demanded and price level at point A, we can see the elasticity equals 4. At the midpoint, at the midpoint, which is C, which is 610. 610 obviously is the inverse ratio of 12 over 10/6 is the inverse ratio of 12 over 20. And so from that reason we can see the midpoint elasticity always equals 1.
Yeah, we can plug the formula into that. It's pretty simple. It's 12 divided by 20 times times the price is 10. 10 over 6.
And because
it becomes
because
1.
the inverse is
exactly.
It's always unit elastic at the midpoint.
Some simple geometry and algebra will deduce to in the midpoint it's always 1.
Yes. And then as you can probably infer, the bottom half below the midpoint, elasticity is always relatively inelastic, as delta Q over delta P times P over Q at the certain price and quantity demanded point at say point E is always 0.25 or lower than 1 always.
Yes, so from this graph, it's pretty simple to see that the elasticity at each point is actually dictated by P divided by Q.
Yes.
Because delta Q divided by delta P is
constant on the straight line.
Yeah, it's constant. In this case, it's always 12 over 20.
Yes.
So the trick is really, on the P divided by Q.
Yes.
Okay. But when on the upper hand, you can see the P is high end. Q is low end.
Yeah.
And in the low part, P is in the low end, and Q is in the high end. So which directly, results in our concluding that is on the upper part, the elasticity is generally greater than 1. And in the lower part, it said that the price is demand is price inelastic, which means E is less than 1.
Yes.
Okay.
So what determines price elasticity of demand? Well, first of all, to come to substitution. Substitution meaning if a good or service has close substitutes, then usually demand will be more elastic. Because if the price changes to unfavorable circumstances for the consumer, then they would typically be more able to switch to another brand or another product, substitute product more easily, and so their demand would change drastically, relatively speaking. But if they had no close substitutes, then they would have no choice but to stick with a certain good or service. So even with a price increase, their demand will be the quantity demand change will be less because they don't have a choice.
Yeah, it's just like a vaccine. Usually, when the vaccine is first available, usually the PEOD is pretty large because no matter price change how much, you need that. Okay, but when time goes by, you get more substitute. So time is also a determinant.
Yes, and we'll get to that very quickly. And second determinant similarly is whether the good is necessity or luxury. Necessities are obviously you need them. You don't have a choice but to use them. And so basically necessities have lower price elasticities relatively speaking because consumers they need to purchase this good or service, so they don't have a choice but to stick with that good or service regardless of how much the price increases. So their quantity demand change will likely stay the same or likely be low. And luxuries, of course, they are not luxuries that are not needed. So consumers, if it's unfavorable in price in terms of price, they will quickly abandon luxury. See a large decrease in price, quantity demanded. Of course, percent income spent is similar as well because let's say if a good or service takes up a large chunk of your income,
like a house, for example,
your demand will probably be more elastic because you cannot afford such drastic price increases. So your quantity demanded would change by a large amount than price.
For example, the housing market could only appreciate for 10%. But a lot of potential house buyers will either get out of the housing market or maybe downgrade the house because
5% larger than 40.
You said 10% of the housing increase, it could be $40,000 already. So that's a large percent of income.
And so finally, as Michael previously mentioned, time. Over time, people have more ability to find substitutes. And then more ability to basically adjust their living conditions or adjust whether to change a good from a necessity to a luxury, maybe even. And so over time, your price elasticity demand increases because you see more people being able to move out of that good or not being forced into that good. And so they will.
The PEOD will increase because the substitution effect becomes more dominant.
Becomes stronger. And the necessitary effect becomes weaker. And so for final clues, which mentioned PEOD measures demand sensitivity relative to price, and it's all relative changes. So our classical demand curve shows us the story because it shows different regions. The upper part is elastic relatively because the quantity effect dominates, which means that a price decrease has an effect of increasing our revenue.
Because the price is so high, and then even a small price decrease will result in a larger percentage the quantity.
But at the midpoint, this is offset by the price effect. So the price effect and quantity effect are both neutralized by each other at the midpoint, which causes our elasticity to equal 1. And finally, at the lower part, elasticity is relatively inelastic or less than 1 because the price effect now dominates, which means that producers can afford to increase prices in general because because the price is so low, they can afford to increase it because the price is a bigger factor, which results in increased revenue with an increased price.
That's just the other part because the price is so low. When the price increases, let's say 10%, and the quantity actually they will decrease by less than 10%.
Yes.
Yeah, because the price is very low already.
Yes.
Okay, so the quantity will not shrink that too much. Okay, so without the sales price, actually the net sales actually increase. So we call the price effect dominance when we look at the low part of the demand. It's actually very common sense, right?
Yes.
Very much it's very natural. So it's nothing really very complicated here. But finally, I would like to point out that the PEOD, the main part is demand sensitivity. Okay.
Yeah.
Later on, we're going to talk about the elasticity of demand for other parts, like say income, right?
Yes.
Income, elasticity of demand, etc. So this part, I would like to focus on the demand sensitivity. Okay. So the main part is EOD actually. So
Yes.
whether it's a price or income, but the main part is the demand sensitivity. Okay. So we'll talk about more on this, demand sensitivity, the elasticity of demand later on. See you guys. Bye bye.